I didn't find the betrayal in his eyes or on his phone. I found it in the glove compartment tucked behind stale gum and old registration papers, where dust settles when a house is too quiet. A box of condoms. Brand new. Not our brand. Not our story. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to cardboard and cellophane, to the tremor in my fingers and the rush of heat up my neck. I heard the house breathe behind me, that soft hum of a life I thought was steady, and it felt like it was lying. I closed the glove box, then opened it again as if the second look would put the past back where I left it. It didn't. If stories like this hook you real, raw, and a little too close to home, hit subscribe to Whispers of Mama Ruth. Tap the like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far my voice travels tonight. I didn't scream. I didn't call him. I stood in the garage, palms sweating against the cool metal of our SUV, and let my heart listen to itself. We hadn't used protection in years. Not since Hope wore baby blue socks and a name we never got to say out loud. He knew that. I knew that. So why did he need a sealed box hidden where wives don't usually look? Unless they're cleaning to feel helpful, to feel needed, to feel loved. I pressed the latch again. The compartment clicked open. Obedient, guilty. My thumb grazed the box. The cardboard felt clean, new, like a confession dressed in plastic. That was when something inside me stood up. Not rage, not yet. A colder thing, a steadier thing. I walked back into the house with the quiet carefulness of a nurse after midnight. The kitchen looked innocent in the afternoon light. The coffee mug he'd used that morning sat in the sink, ringed with trust. It's funny what your brain will do to protect you. It will bargain. It will invent. Maybe they were old. Maybe they were a joke. Maybe they were for a friend. Maybe I hadn't seen what I saw. I washed that mug 3 times as if soap could clean an idea. Then I dried my hands, went to our bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed we had called ours. I stared at the closet where his suits hung like alibis. The day moved without me. I heard time pass in the rhythm of the refrigerator, the hiss of the neighbor's sprinkler, the gentle click of the thermostat. At some point, I stood. I opened a drawer, slid out a small notebook, and wrote one sentence. Glove compartment. Sealed box. Not ours. Under it, I left a second line blank, like a runway. I didn't know for what yet. Just that I would need room. When grief is fresh, it's loud. When betrayal is fresh, it's quiet, sharp, and surgical. You don't shout. You calibrate. I wiped my eyes, then studied my face in the mirror. There was a steadiness I hadn't met before. The kind that moves your feet when your voice isn't ready. I grabbed my keys and purse and drove to the little spice shop 3 blocks from our street. The one that smells like faraway kitchens and late-night laughter. The bell over the door chimed like permission. Habanero, the owner asked, reading something I hadn't said on my face. Habanero, I answered, and my voice didn't shake. I bought a small packet, dried, wicked, the color of warnings, and walked back to the car with my hands careful and my mind clean. It was a short drive home. It felt like a long walk across a bridge I couldn't come back over. At the kitchen table, I laid out a paper towel like an operating drape. I pulled on latex gloves from under the bathroom sink and shook the peppers into my palm. They were pretty in that dangerous way fire is pretty at a distance. I crushed them slow, watching the skin break into flakes, then dust, then something that floated when I breathed. It bit the air, it bit my eyes. Tears came but from heat, not from him. I told myself that mattered. I rinsed the grinder, dried it, and set it aside. My hands moved the way hands do when a recipe has lived in a family longer than memory. Sure, practiced, quiet, I opened the box from the glove compartment as if I were defusing a bomb. One by one, I handled each packet with a reverence I did not feel. It was practical reverence, the kind you give to a tool that can change the outcome. I worked carefully, precisely, ensuring the powder went where it would be most persuasive. Then I sealed everything again, neat as a lie. When I finished, I cleaned the table twice, the sink twice, the counter twice. I peeled the gloves off like skin I no longer needed and tucked them into the deepest corner of the trash. I washed my face. I opened a window. The kitchen cooled. The house exhaled. The afternoon leaned toward evening. And then I went back to the garage. The glove compartment opened as if it knew me now. I returned the box to its exact position, angle, depth, shadow, like a photograph I didn't want anyone to notice had been moved. I closed the door softly and stood there, listening. The house said nothing. The street said nothing. I put my palm on the dashboard and felt the quiet thrum of my own pulse coming back to me. In that silence, I understood something simple and terrible. I didn't have to ask a question to hear the answer. I wiped a single fingerprint I couldn't see. I took one step back, and then another. I didn't tell a soul. I set the table for dinner, folded the napkins, lit two candles that made the room look kinder than it was, and practiced my smile in the reflection of the microwave door. When he walked in later, keys, cologne, the casual weight of his briefcase, I greeted him the way I always had. My voice was warm. My hands were steady. He didn't notice the difference. He wouldn't. Not yet. And that was the point. I didn't scream. I planned. That night, dinner was a performance only I knew I was giving. He talked about quarterly reports and client dinners while slicing through the roast I had prepared as if the table wasn't a stage and he wasn't my leading man pretending not to lie. I smiled when I was supposed to. I nodded when his tone lifted. Every detail, his laughter, his careful chewing, his glass of wine left half full, was recorded in my mind like evidence. The habit of love had turned into the habit of observation. He didn't notice the silence between my words growing heavier, the way my eyes lingered on him half a second too long. He mistook my calm for trust. I mistook his confidence for guilt too comfortable to hide. After dinner, he kissed my cheek casual, habitual, and went upstairs to shower. I listened to the sound of the water running and imagined it washing away fingerprints of another woman I didn't know yet. The thought burned hotter than the habanero dust still hiding in the glove compartment. When he came back down, he smelled of a different soap, not ours. A scent to floral, to new. I asked nothing. Silence became my new language, and I spoke it fluently. The following mornings unfolded like clockwork. He dressed sharp, tied his tie with precision, and left with the same goodbye kiss that used to mean love but now meant routine maintenance. The car keys jingled, the door closed, and I would stand in the hallway listening for something I could no longer name. I began to see things I hadn't seen before, or maybe I had refused to. The late-night messages with the phone face down. The sudden need for privacy in a house that had none. The laughter at texts that arrived too quickly after dinner. The change in playlists sold just replaced by soft pop love songs I didn't recognize. He said he was working later, but the reflection in his eyes when he spoke told me that someone else was giving him reasons to stay away. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from sleeping beside someone whose soul has already left the room. You still feel the warmth, but it no longer belongs to you. At breakfast, he started wearing that same charcoal suit again, even on ordinary days. Client meeting, he'd say, buttoning his cuffs. But when he thought I wasn't looking, he smiled into his reflection like a teenager rehearsing for a secret. That smile used to be mine. Now it was a code I couldn't crack. Days turned into a pattern. Suspicion in the morning, silence by noon, exhaustion by night. I still cooked. I still folded his shirts. But each movement was a ritual of detachment, mechanical, deliberate, safe. I was learning the choreography of a woman preparing to let go. Sometimes, I caught myself staring at the glove compartment in my mind, replaying the moment I found the box. It was the hinge of everything, the quiet border between before and after. I couldn't yet decide which side I was standing on. I started keeping small notes in that same little notebook, hidden between recipe cards and grocery lists. Tuesday, late call, smelled like cologne, laughed easily. Thursday, phone in pocket all evening. Saturday, said he'd fix the porch light. Didn't. Each line was a thread, and together they formed a noose made of truth. Friends would ask if everything was all right. I'd smile the way women do when the truth is too sharp for conversation. He's busy lately, I'd say, stirring my coffee. And they'd nod, relieved not to go deeper. Society prefers its heartbreaks tidy. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, tracing patterns on the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, slow, even, innocent. Betrayal has a sound, you know. It's the sound of calm when you know chaos is brewing. Once, I reached over to touch his hand in the dark, just to see if the man I loved was still in there somewhere. His fingers twitched, but he didn't hold back. The message was clear. There are silences you can feel more loudly than screams. By the end of that week, I wasn't the same woman who had found the box. I was the one preparing for the storm. I hadn't decided what to do yet, but my body already knew. My hands were steady again. My smile practiced. My patience sharpened to a knife's edge. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I simply waited, because sometimes revenge, like chili, tastes better when it's left to rest. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day that feels too ordinary to hold anything dangerous. I woke up before the alarm, the sky still gray, the air thick with that in-between stillness that always precedes a storm. Darius was already in the shower. I listened to the water running and stared at the empty side of the bed, where his warmth used to linger. There was nothing now, just sheets that cooled too quickly. He came out humming a soft tune I didn't recognize and stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie. "Big day," he said, smiling to himself. The kind of smile men wear when they've rehearsed it for someone else. I didn't answer. My silence had become my armor. After he left, the house exhaled the truth I had been holding in. I walked through each room, touching the edges of furniture as if saying goodbye. Then I stopped at the window and watched his car disappear down the street. I waited until the sound of the engine was gone before I whispered to no one, "All right." It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was clarity. I went to the kitchen, poured myself coffee, and opened the small notebook again. My handwriting from the previous days stared back like a witness. Tuesday, came home smelling of perfume. Thursday, locked his phone. Friday, left early. I drew a line beneath the last entry and wrote, "It's time." Sometimes the mind breaks quietly, and sometimes it sharpens instead. Mine sharpened. Every action that followed felt rehearsed, though I'd never imagined this script before. I changed my clothes, tied my hair back, and reached for the drawer under the sink, the one where I'd left the gloves after cleaning. The latex crackled between my fingers. That sound alone made my pulse steady. From the cupboard, I took the small packet of crushed habanero I'd bought days before. It was almost poetic, how harmless it looked, the color of sunsets and warnings. I held it up to the light. It shimmered faintly, like danger disguised as dust. I knew what I was about to do wasn't noble, But betrayal had already rewritten what good meant. I set everything on the kitchen counter. The gloves, a pair of tweezers, a small funnel I'd used once for spices, and a box of the same brand of condoms, his brand now. The box from the glove compartment sat beside it, innocent and damning. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of coffee and something metallic, like anticipation. I put on the gloves. They squeaked softly, a strange, sterile music. One by one, I opened each packet with the precision of someone diffusing guilt. I poured the fine, red powder inside slowly, carefully, feeling it coat the inner walls like a secret that couldn't be undone. The smell rose sharp, dry, merciless. It burned my eyes, but I didn't blink. I wanted to feel it. Every sting was a reminder of what he'd made me swallow for months. When I was done, I sealed them back with gentle pressure, aligning every edge perfectly. I wiped them down with a clean cloth so they looked untouched, new, ready, dangerous. My hands moved mechanically, almost elegantly. Rage had turned into grace. I washed everything twice. The tweezers, the counter, even the air felt scrubbed. Then I took the box, holding it the same way I had when I first found it. Only now it wasn't a symbol of humiliation, it was a weapon disguised as innocence. As I walked toward the garage, I could hear my heart beating in my throat, not from fear but from focus. The SUV stood there, still dusty from the day I discovered the truth. It looked like it had been waiting for me. I opened the glove compartment and slid the box back into place, matching every angle, every fold, every lie. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at it. My reflection in the car window looked calm, almost kind. The woman staring back didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like someone who had learned the cost of silence and decided to make it speak. I whispered to the still air, "If you betray me, at least you'll remember it." Then I closed the glove compartment softly, as if tucking a secret into sleep. The rest of the day passed like a dream made of glass, transparent, fragile, waiting to break. I cleaned, cooked, smiled at neighbors, answered phone calls with the voice of a woman who had nothing to hide. But beneath every word, there was rhythm, a pulse, the rhythm of waiting. That evening, when Darius came home, I greeted him with the same warm tone he had always known. I asked about his day. He told me stories about meetings and clients, his voice smooth, confident. I poured him wine, laughed in the right places, leaned close enough for him to believe the illusion. Inside, I was already gone. He didn't see it the way my hands stayed still when he touched them, or how my eyes didn't search for his anymore. He saw the mask. That's all he needed. When he went to bed, I stood at the window again, watching the streetlights flicker. My mind replayed the scene in the garage. The box, the glove compartment, the sound of the latch clicking shut. Revenge doesn't always arrive with screaming or fury. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits patiently, hidden behind a polite smile and a box no one was supposed to find. I turned off the lights and whispered to the dark, "Let the fire find its way." And somewhere in the quiet, I swear I could already hear the first spark. You'd think the loudest part of revenge would be the act itself, the powder, the gloves, the click of the glove compartment. It isn't. The loudest part is the waiting. The silence that follows a decision is a bell only the guilty can hear. I woke before him and moved through the house the way nurses move through corridors at dawn. Efficient, invisible, precise. I ironed his shirt, the pale blue one he saves for days he wants to look a little younger. I set his watch on the dresser, polished like a medal. I brewed his coffee strong and black, the way a man takes it when he wants to feel certain about something. If he noticed the extra care, He mistook it for devotion. It was choreography. He ate quickly, scrolling through emails with that tight half smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Big client lunch," he said, tying his tie. "Might be late. I'll leave the porch light on," I replied. He kissed my cheek, careless and practiced. His cologne trailed him to the door, and for a second I watched it hang in the air like a curtain after a performance. Then I heard the jingle of keys, the car's beep, the sigh of the garage. My breath held until the sedan backed out and the street swallowed him whole. I waited a full minute 60 measured seconds on the kitchen clock before I let my lungs work again. The silence in the house felt clean. I wiped the counter anyway, then washed a single plate that didn't need washing. When grief leaves, duty steps in. When rage cools, order takes its place. I made the bed with hotel corners. I opened the windows and let the morning act like a witness. When I finally allowed myself to walk to the garage, the SUV sat like a sealed chapter, dust soft as ash, windshield clouded, time arrested. I didn't open the glove compartment. There was nothing left to do. The box was where it needed to be. The rest belonged to fate and habit. Waiting turns people into scientists. You measure breath, weigh glances, clock footsteps. I spent the day noticing. At noon I noticed how the light turned the kitchen tiles into a checkerboard and how easy it would be to step only on the white squares. At 2 I noticed the hum of the refrigerator lining up with the tick of the clock, the way two strangers fall into step without speaking. At 4 I noticed a smudge on the window and wiped it away as though clarity could be polished into existence. I set the table for dinner even though I knew he wouldn't be here for it. Knife to the right, fork to the left, napkin folded like a secret. I lit 2 candles and then, on second thought, blew one out. One flame felt more honest. When dusk finally arrived, it came with a sky the color of old bruises. I drew the curtains as the first streetlights clicked on, tiny moons that belonged to no one. I checked my phone and found nothing. I checked the porch light and found it obedient. I checked my face in the mirror and found it calm. The first text came at 7:26 p.m. "Running late. Don't wait up." I stared at the words until they blurred. I typed okay and didn't send it. Instead, I deleted the draft and placed the phone face down, a little act of theater for an audience of one. At 8:03, I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the couch in the spot where the cushion knows me best. I let the quiet wrap around my shoulders. A neighbor's laugh sifted through the wall. Somewhere a dog barked, then offered an apology to the night by going still again. I could have turned on the television, but the hum of other people's stories felt like an insult to my own. I thought about the glove compartment, not the object, but the idea of it. A small door in a small space where people hide what they don't want to explain. It was almost tender, that glove box, cradling his secret and mine at once. I pictured the box inside it, squared to the corner, lined up with an old map and the ghost of a parking stub. If guilt had geometry, it would be this angle's pretending to be order. At 8:41, a car rolled past. The sound rose, crusted, fell away. Not his. My heart, once trained to sprint at the first hint of his return, kept its pace. That was new. I rinsed the glass, dried it, placed it upside down on the dish towel. The small sound it made was crisp as a period at the end of a sentence. I turned off the kitchen light and walked the familiar path to our bedroom. 3 steps to the hallway, 4 to the door frame, 2 to the switch. The room exhaled that soft linen scent that used to feel like safety. I smoothed the duvet just to make sure the line at the edge was straight. When life unravels, straight lines become a form of prayer. I didn't wonder if he'd choose tonight. I knew he would. Men rarely deny a habit that flatters them. They go where their smiles are rehearsed and their lies require less editing. What I didn't know was the moment the hinge where a routine meeting turns into a decision, where a hotel key becomes a confession you can hold. At 9:12, I lay down fully dressed and watched the dark arrange itself into familiar shapes. The chair in the corner, the wardrobe, the frame of the mirror catching a sliver of streetlight. My breathing found that slow, steady rhythm you use when you want your mind to be the only thing moving. I didn't pray, not for mercy, not for pain. I asked for clarity, and clarity has no God. It only has light. Somewhere between 1 minute and the next, I must have slept one of those thin sleeps that sits on the surface like a leaf on water. I woke to my own name, not spoken aloud but remembered. The house was still, and in that stillness something shifted, a small click inside my chest. The sound of a lock recognizing its key. The first call came at 11:03 p.m. Unknown caller. I watched the screen flash and fade. A second later, it rang again. Unknown caller. There are numbers you know you will answer before you know why. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then lifted the phone and placed it to my ear. The quiet between the second and third breath on the other end told me it was a woman. Silence has an accent when it's about to break. "Hello," I said, my voice steady enough to balance a glass. There was a gasp, wet, jagged, a sound with sharp edges, and then words came out in tatters. "Is our Uterius's wife?" I closed my eyes. The room narrowed to the small blue square of light in my hand and the outline of my own breath. "Yes," I said. The voice dissolved into panic. "Something's wrong, oh God. He's screaming. He says it burns, he can't, he's in the bathroom, and it won't stop. What do I do?" For a heartbeat, I could hear everything. The echo of tile, the slap of water hitting porcelain, a man's ragged curses, a woman's shoes on cheap hotel flooring, the distant, steady hum of a wall unit trying and failing to cool the room. I didn't speak. Not yet. The waiting was over. The silence had done its job. All that remained was the soft, inevitable gravity of consequence. "Please," she said, voice cracking into a whisper. "Please tell me what to do." I opened my eyes to the mirror across the room and found my reflection looking back unafraid, unbroken, unbearably calm. And then, very gently, I breathed in. The line quivered between us like a wire. "Are you there?" she asked, trembling. I let the quiet hold for one more second, the last second before a story changes shape. And then the phone began to ring again. The voice on the line was shredded by panic. It tripped over itself, a chorus of sobs, gasps, and half-formed words. In the background, I could hear a man screaming deep, hoarse, animal. It didn't sound like Darius. It sounded like something inside him was being burned out. "He's on the floor," she cried. "He says it's fire. He can't stop it." The sounds behind her were chaos, running water, a crash, a shout, the muffled echo of pain against tile. I pictured it easily. The cheap hotel bathroom, the bright light, the towels soaked in futility. "What do I do?" she pleaded. I let the silence stretch just long enough for her to hear her own question. My pulse was slow, measured. "You should call an ambulance," I said, my voice as level as a line on paper. She whimpered something that might have been please. I ended the call. The phone slid from my hand and landed softly on the bedspread. The house was quiet again. Even the refrigerator had stopped humming, as if the walls themselves were listening. I stood by the window and looked at the night. The street lights were halos of yellow haze, the wind moving the leaves like whispers of approval. Somewhere out there, the story was writing itself exactly as it needed to be written. Minutes passed. Then the phone rang again, different number, same hysteria. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. There are moments when truth doesn't require participation. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly. The coolness of it a perfect contrast to the heat I had imagined. When I set the glass down, I realized my hands weren't shaking. They hadn't trembled once. Later, around midnight, the calls stopped. The night folded back into itself, unremarkable except for the faint hum of distant sirens. By morning, the world had already started whispering. News travels faster than decency. A colleague texted him. Another texted her. Someone's friend worked near the hospital. Allergic reaction, they said at first. Then, chemical burn. By lunchtime, the story had its own life. People told it with nervous laughter, as though saying the words out loud might protect them from ever being caught in something so ridiculous. I imagined the emergency room. Nurses trying not to smirk. Doctors exchanging looks over clipboards. The fluorescent lights too honest to forgive anyone. Severe irritation, they'd call it. Foreign substance. They would ask what had caused it, and Darius would mumble, and Tiffany would blush, and both would realize that the air itself was judging them. Within 48 hours, the office corridors were buzzing. The secretaries whispered near the printer. The men avoided eye contact. The women smiled too kindly. He became a headline without a newspaper, a cautionary tale told over coffee. Did you hear? They'd ask. At the Sterling Suites. By the end of the week, the emails had stopped coming. His phone stayed silent. HR called him and Tiffany into a small conference room, the kind with bad art and better acoustics for humiliation. Conduct unbecoming, they said. Public embarrassment. There was no argument, no defense. They both signed the papers and left with cardboard boxes instead of dignity. He came home late that night, smelling of antiseptic and shame. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, his hands trembling as if the pain were still crawling under his skin. He didn't look at me. He just sank into the couch and stared at the floor, jaw locked. I sat across from him in the dim light, watching him breathe through his nose, shallow and uneven. For the first time in months, I spoke first. Rough day. He blinked, startled by the calm in my voice. You don't know, he muttered. I smiled, not cruelly, just small and clean. I think I do. He opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. There are wounds that silence more effectively than guilt ever could. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and refilled his glass with water. Drink, I said, placing it in front of him. He obeyed without question. Some habits survive everything, even betrayal. That night, I lay beside him as he slept fitfully, muttering names and excuses into the dark. I watched his face twist and smooth again, a man rehearsing regret in dreams. I didn't touch him. I only whispered to the ceiling, now you understand heat. Outside, the city was quiet, unaware that justice had already been served. The next morning, the sun rose clean and pale through the blinds. The house smelled of coffee and disinfectant. I poured a cup, took a sip, and finally felt the first trace of peace, sharp, precise, earned. Because sometimes revenge doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, waits, and burns exactly where it's supposed to. The days that followed were strange, as if the world itself had decided to humiliate him in installments. Shame didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, each one colder, quieter, sharper. At first, there was the office gossip. It started with whispers in the corridors, subtle glances over coffee cups, the hush that fell whenever he entered a room. No one said anything to his face, but everyone knew. People don't need proof when the story is too delicious to doubt. And this one had everything. a secret hotel, a screaming mistress, a trip to the air, and a man who couldn't look anyone in the eye anymore. By midweek, the story had gone viral in the small corporate ecosystem. Someone from HR accidentally mentioned it at lunch. Someone else innocently confirmed it. The details grew with each retelling. By Friday, the phrase "the chili incident" had made its way into text messages and office jokes. I could almost hear the laughter through the walls of the city. Tiffany stopped coming to work altogether. She called in sick, then resigned, her resignation letter leaking to every inbox in less than an hour. Darius lasted 2 more days before the company asked him to take some time off. He didn't argue. He simply packed his things into a box and left the building without saying goodbye. He came home that evening looking like a ghost, dressed in business casual, pale, hollow-eyed, tie hanging loose. The front door closed softly behind him, as though even it felt sorry for him. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood there, holding that box against his chest like a shield. When he finally sat down, his hands trembled on his knees. I watched him from the kitchen doorway. The man who used to fill rooms with his voice now couldn't stand the sound of his own breathing. His pride had melted faster than the ice in his untouched glass of water. I didn't say I was sorry. I didn't ask what happened. He knew that I knew, and that was punishment enough. In the following days, he avoided mirrors. He stayed indoors, blinds drawn, as if daylight might recognize him. The phone stopped ringing. The few friends he had left found reasons not to visit. Even his mother's calls grew shorter, her tone clipped with disappointment. There's a kind of loneliness that only disgrace can buy. The neighborhood had already heard. I saw it in the way Mrs. Langford from next door paused before waving, the way the mailman avoided eye contact when handing over the letters. The whispers trailed us even in the grocery store aisles, soft, poisonous echoes of pity disguised as curiosity. Once, at the local cafe, 2 women from the PTA looked up from their cappuccinos as I walked in. One whispered, "That's her," and the other's mouth tightened around her straw. I smiled politely. It was strange how calm I felt. Their judgment was his to carry, not mine. He began drinking earlier each evening. At first it was 1 glass of whiskey, then 2. Then the bottle left open overnight. He sat on the couch, staring at the muted television, as if the static might offer forgiveness. Sometimes he'd start to say something, "You don't understand," or "I didn't mean," but the words died halfway. I stopped waiting for explanations. My heart had already buried the version of him I loved. What remained was a stranger learning what it feels like to burn without flames. I took back my silence, not as a weapon now, but as peace. I started sleeping through the night again. I stopped checking the garage. I threw away the gloves. The smell of chili had finally faded from the air, leaving behind nothing but stillness. When he left the house one morning without a word, I didn't ask where he was going. But that evening, a friend texted me a photo from the gym downtown. He was sitting alone in the locker area, head in his hands, while a group of men whispered nearby, smirking. The caption read, "Heard the legend's true." I didn't reply. Justice, once set in motion, doesn't need witnesses. A week later, he came home with a box of his personal items, from work photo frames, old notebooks, the company mug he used every morning. He placed it on the dining table, looked at me, and said quietly, "They fired me." I didn't react. I just nodded and asked if he wanted tea. He stared at me for a long time, perhaps searching for the woman who used to console him, the one who used to care. But she was gone. What he saw now was someone who had already made peace with the ruin. He whispered, "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. "No," I said. I don't waste hate. And that was the truth. Hate still meant he mattered. He didn't anymore. That night, as he slept in the other room, I sat on the porch and breathed in the cool air. The world felt wider, quieter, almost merciful. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for anything, not his apology, not his downfall. It had all already happened. Inside, the clock ticked steadily. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of laughter drifting from a neighbor's house, bright, carefree, untouched by the ashes of my story. I smiled, not bitterly but with understanding. He had lost everything that mattered to him, and I had finally regained everything that mattered to me. It was almost dawn when he finally decided to speak. The house was dark, quiet except for the refrigerator's soft hum and the faint tremor in his voice. I had been awake for hours, watching the window shift from black to the gray of resignation. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, shirt wrinkled, eyes swollen from another sleepless night. For once, he looked smaller than the lies he'd been carrying. I need to explain, he said. I didn't look up. Then explain. The words came out slow, broken, like a faucet that hadn't been used in years. It wasn't what you think, he started, which was how every liar begins. His hands trembled as they searched for a place to rest on the doorframe, the back of a chair. The air between us. It just happened. I didn't mean to hurt you. I smiled, a small, tired curve that didn't reach my eyes. You bought new condoms, Darius. You hid them in our car. You used them in a hotel. Tell me, which part of that just happened? He froze. For the first time, there was no excuse ready. The performance had ended, and he didn't remember his lines. The silence between us was sharp enough to cut skin. I saw you, I said softly, at the Sterling Suites, with Tiffany. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Denial was useless now. Truth was a corner he couldn't escape from. The air thickened with all the things he'd never thought I'd know. She called me, I added. That night, his eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. What did she? She screamed. Said you were in pain. Said you were burning. I tilted my head, studying him the way one studies a stranger trying to borrow a face you used to recognize. She asked me what to do. He swallowed hard, jaw tightening. What did you say? I told her to call an ambulance. For a long moment, he said nothing. His breathing grew shallow, uneven. Then, almost in a whisper, you did this? I didn't flinch. No, Darius. You did this. I just let consequence find its way home. He took a step toward me, then stopped halfway, as though afraid the air between us might burn. You could have killed me. I met his eyes, steady and unblinking. I could have, but I didn't. You're welcome. He sank into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. I watched the tremor in his shoulders, the way pride tries to survive even after everything else is gone. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet not with regret, but with fear. You don't understand, he murmured. I was lost. She made me feel alive again. Then I'm glad she was there to call 911 when your definition of alive turned into screaming. His breath caught. For a moment, he looked like he might beg, or apologize, or both. But then something else took over, a flash of anger, small and pitiful. You planned this. You're cruel. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. No, Darius. I was quiet. There's a difference. The weight of that truth settled between us like smoke. I reached for a folder on the table and slid it across to him. Bank statements, hotel receipts, photos. Proof gathered with the patience of someone who had already stopped hoping for honesty. His fingers hovered over them but didn't touch. "How long?" I asked. "How long have I been living next to your lie?" He exhaled through his teeth. "A few months," he said finally. "It wasn't supposed to last." I laughed softly. "None of your choices ever were." Tears threatened at the edges of my composure, but they didn't fall. I wouldn't give him that mercy. "You spent our savings," I continued. "You paid for dinners, hotels, jewelry. You used the money I saved for our children's school fees. Tell me again how you didn't mean to hurt me." He looked down, shame pooling like spilled ink. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't know how to stop. I stood up, my chair legs scraping against the floor. "That's the thing about fire, Darius. It doesn't stop on its own. It burns until there's nothing left to destroy." He didn't follow when I walked toward the door. Maybe he knew there was nowhere to go. Maybe he finally understood that the woman standing before him was not the same one he had betrayed. At the doorway, I turned once more. "Do you know what the worst part is?" I asked. "It's not the affair. It's that you made me doubt the best parts of myself to protect the worst parts of you." He opened his mouth, but I didn't wait for his reply. I left him there surrounded by his paperwork, his silence, and the ashes of everything he once called home. That night, I packed a suitcase with steady hands. One for me, one for the children. Clothes, documents, nothing sentimental. When I zipped it shut, it sounded like a verdict. As the sun rose, I left the key on the kitchen counter beside the folder and a note that simply read, "You burned it." I just watched. Then I walked out without looking back. The door closed behind me with a softness that felt like mercy. I didn't cry when I left. I thought I would, that there'd be some cinematic wave of sadness, something to match the years I'd spent keeping us alive. But there wasn't. There was only silence, and the sound of my own footsteps echoing down the driveway. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was relief. I drove without knowing where I was going, only that it had to be away. Away from the house that had turned into a museum of lies. Away from the scent of his cologne that still lingered on the curtains. Away from the echo of a man who once swore I was his home. When the car stopped, I realized I was parked in front of Centennial Park, the same place we'd taken family photos years ago, smiling like people in a postcard. I watched joggers pass by, the normalcy of strangers living lives untouched by betrayal. And then, my phone buzzed. A message from a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Elias Hawthorne, Tiffany's husband. I heard what happened. "Can we talk?" I stared at the words. There was no anger in them, just exhaustion. A kind of grief that recognized itself in mine. After a few minutes, I typed back, "Yes, where?" We met the next day on a park bench shaded by an old oak tree. He looked thinner, quieter, his face pale but composed. When he saw me, he nodded, not out of greeting, but understanding. Two soldiers meeting on opposite sides of the same battlefield. "I don't know how to start," he said softly. "You don't have to," I replied. "I already know." I told him everything, what I'd found, what I'd done, what had happened since. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't even flinch when I told him about the chili. He just listened, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the ground like a man trying to balance dignity and disbelief. When I finished, he sighed. "She told me part of it," he said, "but not the truth. She never says the truth." He fell silent again, staring at the pond where ducks floated like small, peaceful islands. His voice broke the stillness. "You did what I couldn't," he murmured. "You ended it." "I didn't end it," I said. "I just let it burn. We sat like that for a long time, to people who had lost everything except the ability to understand each other. When he finally stood, he looked taller, lighter, as if knowing the truth had given him back gravity. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not staying silent." That night, I drafted the divorce papers. The pen didn't tremble once. My lawyer called it the cleanest case he'd ever handled. No arguments, no negotiations, just evidence and exhaustion. Darius signed them 3 days later, hands shaking, eyes hollow. When the court stamped the final decree, I didn't feel triumph. I felt empty in a peaceful way, like when a storm ends and you realize you've survived, even if the landscape is unrecognizable. Tiffany and Elias's marriage dissolved soon after. Rumor had it she begged for forgiveness, that she swore it was an emotional mistake, that she tried to rebuild. But Elias, like me, had learned the beauty of no. He left with quiet dignity, and she stayed behind in a house full of mirrors that reflected only her choices. Meanwhile, my days began to unfold differently. The mornings were quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't accuse you anymore. I moved into a small apartment with the children, a modest space with walls that didn't hold secrets. The first night, we ate dinner on the floor because I hadn't unpacked the chairs yet. We laughed between bites of takeout. It felt like breathing after years underwater. Sometimes, the loneliness would sneak in, not for him, but for the version of myself that had believed so fiercely in us. I'd catch myself glancing at the empty side of the bed, not with sadness, but with gratitude that it was finally empty for a reason that made sense. The neighborhood gossip faded, as gossip always does when people find new scandals. Some avoided me, others offered fake sympathy, but I didn't care. The shame had shifted hands. I walked with my head high, because for the first time, I wasn't the one hiding. One evening, I passed by our old house. The windows were dark, the curtains closed, the yard unkempt. It looked abandoned, though I knew he was still inside, living like a ghost among memories that refused to forgive him. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just whispered, "You're free, and so am I." When I reached my apartment, the children were already asleep. I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like tiny affirmations. The pain hadn't disappeared, it had transformed. It had become something I could live with, something that no longer controlled me. I was no longer Mrs. Darius Bennett. I was just me. And for the first time, just me felt enough. Healing never announces itself. It slips in quietly, in the space between what used to hurt and what finally doesn't. For a long time, my life felt like a series of unfinished sentences, laundry half folded, coffee left to cool, thoughts that stopped before they reached forgiveness. But slowly, imperceptibly, the rhythm began to change. Mornings were no longer heavy. I woke to sunlight instead of alarm clocks, to birds instead of tension. The apartment smelled like vanilla candles and laundry detergent, not cologne and arguments. I learned how to fill silence with peace rather than fear. I learned how to make breakfast for myself without setting an extra plate. I didn't rush. Healing isn't about movement, it's about stillness. I gave myself permission to stop pretending everything was fine. I let the grief sit beside me like an old friend who knew all my secrets. Some days, I talked to it. Some days, I ignored it. But I never fought it again. The children adjusted faster than I expected. Their laughter started returning like sunlight through clouds. They no longer flinched at raised voices because there were none. We built new routines: pancakes on Sundays, movie nights on Fridays, music playing while we cooked dinner. Our little apartment began to feel less like a temporary refuge and more like a home that had always been waiting for us. Then, One afternoon, a message appeared on my phone. Elias, just checking in. How are you holding up? I stared at it for a while before replying, better, you. His answer came almost instantly, same. Maybe coffee sometime? We met at a small cafe near the park. The same bench where we had first sat weeks earlier was visible through the window. There was no tension this time, only a quiet understanding. We didn't talk about them. We talked about everything else, work, children, books, the weather. It was the kind of conversation that didn't need repair. Coffee became a habit, then walks, then long talks that stretched into sunsets. We never labeled it, never hurried it. We were two people learning how to exist again, side by side, without pretense. There was no spark of sudden passion, just a warmth that built slowly, safely, honestly. He'd tell me about his daughter and how she still asked why her mother wasn't home. I told him about my son's new obsession with drawing superheroes. We laughed at the small absurdities of single parenthood, at the way life insists on continuing even after it breaks you. Sometimes, after one of those walks, I'd catch myself smiling for no reason, not because I was falling in love, but because I had stopped falling altogether. That, I realized, was its own kind of freedom. Weeks turned into months. The pain turned into a scar, visible but painless to touch. The nights were no longer haunted by memories of Darius or Tiffany. Their names became echoes, then whispers, then nothing. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't wish them anything at all. Indifference is the quietest revenge of all. One evening, Elias and I sat in the park again. The city hummed softly around us. The kids were playing nearby, laughter mixing with the sound of the wind through the trees. He turned to me and said, "You seem lighter." "Maybe I am," I said. "Or maybe I'm just done carrying things that were never mine." He smiled, a small, gentle curve that didn't need translation. It wasn't flirtation. It was respect. It was peace, recognizing itself in someone else. We started seeing each other more often, not because we needed to, but because it felt natural. No grand gestures, no declarations, no promises. Just small things, helping each other with groceries, sharing quiet dinners, holding space for laughter. There was a moment, months later, when we were sitting on his porch watching the sunset. He reached for my hand, not urgently, not possessively, but like someone placing faith where it belongs. I let him. Our fingers fit not perfectly, but comfortably, like two people who had learned that love doesn't need perfection to feel true. In that touch, I felt something shift, not the thrill of newness, but the calm of recognition. It wasn't the kind of love that blinds. It was the kind that heals. When I went home that night, I looked at myself in the mirror. There were still faint lines under my eyes, tiny reminders of the nights I'd spent crying into silence. But behind them, there was strength, a steadiness I hadn't known I was capable of. Healing hadn't made me softer. It had made me clear. I no longer saw myself as the woman who found the condoms, or the wife who filled them with chili, or the victim of betrayal. I was simply a woman who had walked through fire and come out clean. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need revenge, or closure, or even certainty. I just needed the next morning. Love didn't end that story. Truth did. But what followed, what rose quietly from the ashes, was something far more sacred than the word love could hold. It was peace. It was stillness. It was the gentle, unwavering calm of knowing who I am when no one is watching. I used to think strength meant staying, that forgiveness meant forgetting, that being a good wife meant fixing what someone else broke. But I learned that walking away can be the most faithful act of love, faithful to yourself, to your sanity, to your dignity. Months passed, and the noise of what happened began to fade like distant thunder. The world moved on, as it always does, and so did I. The children smiled more, laughed louder, slept without the tension that used to hang in the air. Our new home smelled like coffee, crayons, and peace. Elias and I never rushed anything. What grew between us wasn't built on fear of loneliness, but on the comfort of truth. He never asked for promises. I never offered illusions. Sometimes we just sat in silence, knowing that the absence of pain is its own kind of joy. One evening, as the sun set behind the park, his daughter and mine were chasing bubbles that glowed in the golden light. He turned to me and said, "Do you think we deserve this?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. No one deserves pain, but we do deserve what we learn from it. He nodded, smiling softly, the kind of smile that feels like a thank you without words. And for the first time since everything collapsed, I felt whole, not because someone loved me, but because I had learned how to love myself again. Sometimes I still think about that box in the glove compartment, how something so small carried the weight of an entire marriage, how a single moment of deceit revealed everything that had been rotting quietly beneath our life. But I don't feel bitterness anymore. The memory doesn't sting. It simply exists like an old scar that proves I survived. Pain is not the end of the story. It's the edit that makes room for something better. If you're listening to me right now, wherever you are, remember this. You can't control what people hide from you, but you can decide what to do when you finally see the truth. You can either let it break you, or let it set you free. I chose freedom. And if my story reached your heart tonight, if it reminded you that healing is possible no matter how deep the wound, then don't leave without letting me know. Tap like, subscribe to Whispers of Mama Ruth, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Because somewhere out there, another woman might need to hear that she's not alone. With love and respect, Mama Ruth.